Good evening, Professor and classmates. My name is Nicole Brown, and this is my older adult oral video presentation. With my presentation, I'm going to talk about my interview that I had the pleasure of doing with one of my brother's neighbors. She was kind enough to allow me to interview her and get some really good information and some really good feedback. And I was able to apply a lot of the things that we've learned during this course to her life cycle, and it was pretty interesting. So, my interviewee is a 65-year-old female. She has 5 children and 11 grandchildren. She is now retired and lives alone. She is a widow. Um, but from her being a widow, her and her husband were married for 46 years. And although she was married to her husband for 46 years, they never had a legal separation. So she remained married to her husband until his death. They were separated for most of her children's young lives and their as well as their adult lives. So the developmental stage that I chose to focus on from Erikson's theory, which stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation. And in this stage, it is the seventh of 8 stages, and it is the cycle where an adult feels like what's their purpose? How can they contribute back to the generations or the culture that's following them? How can they be impactful? And this stage is usually, this stage is from ages 40 to 65. Um, and again, at this juncture, the adult is just basically focused on making a mark with the generation that's after them. They are invested in their families, their communities, they're invested in their work, and just being kind of impactful and just giving back and making a difference. They're not for themselves, they're more so concerned with the well being of others. And it is defined in Rogers' text as adults are involved in investing in their work, families, communities, and future generations. They begin to look past their own lives to the well being of those around them. Adults who are unable to do this never move past investing in themselves and are self absorbed. They become stagnated and are unable to be productive for the sake of others. So some of the my interviewees' experiences that contributed to why we focus on this stage is she experienced abuse from her mother. There was death of a close sibling, one in which she developed like a really close bond in their own subsystem. Um, she visited the Expo 67 in Canada when she was 12 years old, the World's Fair. She married her high school neighborhood sweetheart. The birth of her children was an experience that shaped her life. There was also the separation from her husband, which was early on in their marriage, which caused her to be a single parent. So, for quite some time, she was utilizing the public welfare system. Then she eventually got a job at the Social Security Administration, in which she was there for the majority of her adult life. And a significant event was the loss of her son, which caused her to have an early retirement. So, some of the challenges and accomplishments as a result of my interviewee's experience is a difficult relationship with her mother. Her mother, although it was not physical abuse, it was emotional abuse. It really wasn't a good relationship. It was a lot of chaos, a lot of high expectations placed upon her being the eldest of the girls. She was not the eldest of her siblings, but she was the eldest of the girls. So that generational trauma from her mother was kind of passed down to her because of how her mother was raised and the expectations placed upon her. And her mother was just heavily focused on raising all of her siblings and was not able to kind of focus on my interviewing. So there was a lot of expectations for her, for my interviewee, to nurture her younger siblings in effort to help her mother out. So because of that, there were a lot of missed childhood opportunities for her. She kind of grew up a little bit quicker than her peers. There was a lot of household responsibilities placed upon her, and she was not able to fully live her childhood from her perspective. So, as I mentioned, she lost her brother, which was a big part of her own subsystem. So, she had to cope with death early on. And then, when in her emerging adulthood, she got married early. She got married to her high school sweetheart. And this was as a result of wanting to establish her own life and move away from that of the life with her parents and her siblings. Um, and so in her adulthood, in her children, she lost a child. Um, but some of the accomplishments from all of her challenges and crises is she moved towards generativity. In her emerging adulthood, she took her experience and became an active community member, a block captain. She's now involved with her grandchildren's activities, heavily involved in their sports and their dance. She kind of organizes family events, and so she's, as a result of her grandchildren being around, she's kind of like the neighborhood mother. And she has also established a business with her daughter. So, according to Erikson's theory, the crisis in this stage is that if the adult does not successfully resolve their crisis or move through them in an effective way, they kind of become stagnant. They become self absorbed. They only can focus on themselves and not the well being of others. They're not able to be productive for the sake of others. They kind of don't develop that sense of what can I contribute to life, to my family, to my community. So some of the crises in my interviewee's life was abuse and forced responsibility, um, loss, loss in her immediate family members with her siblings, and she also lost a son. And so through her separation, she experienced single parenting, and as a result, financial struggles. She had exposure to substance abuse in her neighborhood when she was a child, and also through her husband, and some generational trauma. Her son also experienced substance abuse. So the biopsychosocial events that facilitated a resolution, which I really wanted to focus on, was her attendance at the Expo 67. So with this definitely encouraged meaning making. From my annotated bibliography, I was able to read about meaning making and how that can contribute to generativity. Essentially, the adult takes those experiences in their life and they develop resiliency. They grow through the trauma, and some of the things that they develop is trust, autonomy, and initiative. So she was able to take her crises and resolve them and move through her stage and become a better adult and have a better outcome in what she wants to contribute to life. So this is actually why I focus on this stage, is because she's heavily involved in giving back to her children to ensure that they don't go through the same things that she went through as a child. She's very positive in her outlook. She took and changed her narrative from her trauma, and she was able to be resilient as a result of her crises. And it just seemed like she's focused on making an impactful difference in her immediate family as well as her community. So some diversity and differences that were present in my interviewee's life is her socioeconomic status. They lived in a lower class. She had one working parent. Her mother was the caretaker in the house, and her father just worked. She was subjected to substance abuse in her neighborhood, as well as when she got married through her husband. And roles were established. It was the girl's responsibility to do a lot of things in the home. So that's some of the diversity and difference that contributed to the way that her life was shaped and the way that she sees things now. So the oppression from the perspective of my interviewee is that she was unable to embrace her childhood. Her mother's generational trauma was projected upon her, so she in turn had to live the way that her mother thought was culturally appropriate for her. It was not pleasant. It wasn't like a learning experience on how to be a young woman. It was more so, this is what you have to do. So her mother was overwhelmed, which took away from her nurturing all of her children, and that responsibility kind of fell on my interviewee and her younger siblings. So the systems theory that I wanted to focus on was family systems theory. As I mentioned, there were defined roles based on the expectation of my interviewee's parents. There was some entropy. The death of her sibling kind of caused the chaos and then moved the family into a different direction. So therefore, their homeostasis was disrupted. What was essentially functional, her mother became even more full of chaos and disrupted in her thinking and the way that she nurtured and took care of her children. So my interviewee experienced similar conditions in her life with her own marriage, but again, she moved towards generativity and decided to have positive outcomes as a result of her own life. So we could take a look, and looking at the systems theory, we could take a look at all of the stuff that my interviewee went through. She has two deceased parents. Her sibling, who she was very close to, passed away. She has another sibling right after her that passed away. Her husband passed away, and she had a child who passed away due to substance abuse as well. The orange border marks substance abuse, and her son engaged in alcoholism. And there were some mental health issues there with her son as well. And so you can see that the relationship with my interviewee and her mother was full of abuse. It wasn't really physical, but it was emotional. It was mental, and it affected my interviewee. But again, she took those hardships and the things that she went through and changed her narrative and her direction. So the additional theory that I wanted to focus on was Piaget's cognitive adaptation process. So although the theory does not explain continued development in adulthood, I was able to conceptualize her life cycle using the concepts of schema, accommodation, and assimilation, right? So her schema essentially was the way that her mother shaped how life and family and how you should conduct yourself should be. So she took the knowledge that she already had, she took her experiences, her meaning making, and she shaped the way that her life was going to be. And she's, she is adapting and changing her trajectory to overcome any adversities that she has. So she moved towards resiliency, and she just changed the way that her life was. So she essentially, whatever her thought process was, whatever she was raised upon, the cultures and the roles, she was able to change that and assimilate those things with her current knowledge and make her life what she actually wanted it to be. So some of the limitations to that theory is that we all know that it stops at adolescence. So it doesn't really speak to adulthood. But I find that because these theories, they can be outdated, but they also can serve a purpose. Just like, we can apply the adaptation process and apply it to current day. So again, even though it's outdated, we can apply that. Also, the stages of development does not leave room from variation. So they're in steps, and it doesn't leave room for us to kind of move around. A stage may be applied before another stage. And so here are my references right here. I learned a lot, and my interviewer was gracious and provided me with a good perspective on how you can be resilient after trauma. And I thank you.